Hi there, and welcome to the book club. My name is Mr. Daryl.
And my name is Mr. Alex.
Today, we are going to be talking about a classic literary phenomenon, Sherlock Holmes himself.
We were going to speak about Sign of Four, and I have to say, Daryl, another classic. It keeps you on your on the edge of your seat from until the very ending. And again, like we usually do, I'd like to speak about the author, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, this is quite an individual we're dealing with here. And if you think Sherlock Holmes is talented and gifted at what he does, this is a man of many, many different talents. Standing at 6 foot tall and weighing 100 kilograms, he is an immense man. Now, he is gifted in multiple sports, played rugby, cricket, was a very keen boxer. But as well as that, he was a really keen inventor, and he invented some things you might not know about. He invented downhill skiing, the life jacket, and the inflatable raft. So very intelligent man.
So a jack of all trades, as we say, a man with many skills and a man with many interests.
Absolutely, and I think his best quality also is that he was an adventurer at heart. He had a thirst for knowledge, a thirst for understanding, and also he wanted to travel the world, to expand his horizons. So this is a very well-rounded man, for certain.
We almost have the situation where the author is competing with the character for relevancy.
Yes, absolutely, and this would be the bane of his life. He doesn't really like the character he's created, as we'll come to understand during this program. So, how did it all begin? Arthur Conan Doyle, he's married his wife, they've got a child, and they're in desperate need of money. Now, typically, Arthur Conan Doyle always had the desire to write historical fictions, to write fictions about the medieval period in Britain, but having an understanding that at the time sort of mystery crime fictions were quite popular, he gave it a go, essentially, and that's how Sherlock Holmes was born. He sent it off to the magazine, made £10, which was enough for the time, but he didn't think he would do much beyond that. And, you know, it didn't really gain much traction in the beginning. But things would change. And now there's the Lippincott's magazine, which is a very famous magazine in New York. And the editor happened to be in London. And the editor actually read Conan Doyle's first edition of Sherlock Holmes and loved it so much that they said, I have to get in contact with him. So the editor set up a lunch meeting with Arthur Conan Doyle, along with another author, which you will find interesting, Oscar Wilde, who was also beginning his writings. And the editor essentially said to both of them that, I want you guys to reproduce more of what you've already done. I really like your work, and we will meet again, and we will read each other's work, okay? So they go off. Conan Doyle says, quite reluctantly, okay, I'm going to write the Sherlock Holmes story. And this is when he comes up with Sign of Four. And when he gives the editor Sign of Four, the editor absolutely loves it. And at this time, Oscar Wilde also came up with The Picture of Dorian Gray,
yes,
which undoubtedly intimidated Arthur Conan Doyle, but again, he was in need of money, so he handed in Sign of Four.
There's an interesting lesson here. So Doyle was beset with insecurities, like the best of us, like all of us, and he did not let that stop him from producing some of his best work.
I suppose there's an important lesson to be learned here, and that is that we shouldn't compare our success to the success of others. We should only measure our success by how we improve ourselves. Excellent
point, Alex.
Now, the setting is, it's set against the backdrop of London. Again, we've spoken about Victorian London before, but this is a very dark, gloomy, mysterious place. Very bad air as well because of the Industrial Revolution and all the smoke that was being pumped out by the factories. And we get this image of a Sherlock Holmes who is a recluse in a city surrounded by evil. And this evil even comes from places outside of London. So in The Sign of Fall, the evil comes from the temple in Agra, which is in India. And you get this image of the tentacles of evil coming all across the world into London.
You know, well, that brings up the image of concealment. So London is in concealment. It's covered with fog. It's covered with smog. There's all sorts of seedy elements as well happening because it's industrializing so fast. There's Jack the Ripper, as we mentioned before, and it's almost as if Doyle chose and created Sherlock Holmes to be the light in the middle of that darkness. He blesses Sherlock with vast intelligence and perceptive rationality and logic, and it's almost as if Sherlock is the man to lighten up London for us.
Which moves us on to the next point, which is one of the really large themes. And like you mentioned, the Industrial Revolution, there was a fascination, yet a huge worry when it came to the Industrial Revolution. People didn't know what to make of it. People didn't completely understand it. So there was this desire to believe in the omnipotence of science. Science was the new religion, that science was reliable and could give us truth.
There were many writers, in fact, at that time, writing about the triumph of reason. H.G. Wells, he has a classic science fiction book, The Time Traveler. Philosophers like Bertrand Russell, so they're all talking about the triumph of reason, progress, and society moving ahead. And in a sense, Sherlock is another figure in that trend towards moving towards reason. He embodies reason. He is the man of the intellect.
Absolutely, he is a guiding light.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sherlock Holmes as a character himself. He's quite a non-typical hero. As much as people love him and treat him as a hero, he is non-typical, and in the sense that he's quite asocial. He doesn't really have any friends. I mean, maybe you could count Dr. Watson, but even so, he doesn't particularly like human interaction, and he's sort of quite out of touch with the world. And I think he can't really understand other human beings because he is so different from other human beings. He's very unsympathetic.
Yes, he's not a typical action hero as we imagine them today. I mean, today we have James Bond and Indiana Jones and so on. These rugged action men, and Sherlock Holmes being an early action figure, doesn't really show that. Doesn't really have that action feel to him. He's more reserved, he's more intellectual, and he uses his mind as opposed to his fists.
And he's really obsessed with using his intellect. I remember at the beginning of Sign of Fall, Sherlock Holmes is walking around the room restlessly, telling Dr. Watson, "I'm just so bored. Give me a case to solve. You know, I feel incomplete."
Yeah.
Solving mysteries and solving murders, it's almost like his purpose. For him, life without these cases, crimes and mysteries, it would almost be meaningless.
It wouldn't even be life for him. He doesn't have too many relationships as well. He's dedicated to his purpose of uncovering the mystery behind things. And remember, and we go back to the setting of London being dark and cloudy and foggy and smoggy. Again, Sherlock is he's that light in the middle of London.
Which moves us on to Dr. John Watson. And we see Sherlock Holmes and understand Sherlock Holmes through Dr. John Watson. And he is a much more relatable character. And just like us as the reader, and when we're reading, we don't really know where the novel's going to go. We don't understand things like Sherlock Holmes does. It's the same for John Watson. He's also kept in the dark by Sherlock Holmes. But John Watson is also the bridge between us to Sherlock Holmes, so we can gain a better understanding of him.
But John John Watson is the common touch almost, just as Sherlock needs Dr. Watson to communicate with the rest of the world because Sherlock is so isolated often. Dr. Watson is our connection into the book. He's our common touch to get to the mind of Sherlock, who otherwise would be a bit foreign for most of us, I think. He's hard to relate to in many ways.
Imagine a Sherlock Holmes novel without Dr. Watson. I don't think it would have nearly as much the same appeal. There's
an excellent point that comes up from this. Friendship, the friendship between them is a key point as well. That's a really poignant part of the book. In fact, there's a quote. It's one of the greatest relationships in history, one of the greatest friendships in history. The friendship between Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes.
And I believe that quote is by Anthony Horowitz, the British writer. Yes.
Yeah.
So now the impact. This is also fascinating, because here we have an example of fiction becoming a reality. And in 1910, Edmund Locard, who was an investigator, he actually establishes the first forensics police laboratory. And he himself cited Holmes as his main source of inspiration, citing Holmes' use of deductive reasoning, his use of evidence, picking up samples, testing these samples, and etc.
That's a great example of life imitating art. Which happens often enough that it should have its own lecture, probably. Life imitating art, it's amazing, and we can talk about science fiction being exemplary for this, where the literature predicts what will happen in the future in society before it happens. And there's a vicious circle, I guess, that comes up from this. Is it the literature that pushed this on us, or is it were we ready for it to begin with?
A really good example that comes to mind is Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, which is based on a book itself. And in the book and the film, we've got computer chess. So you could play chess against a computer. And at the time, people were amazed by this idea and thought it was completely impossible. But for us today, it's installed in almost every single laptop available.
It's on my Windows at home.
Yeah.
And as well, the show Star Trek with its communication devices, that was a direct link to our modern day cell phones. The people who came up with the cell phones say that they were inspired by that TV show, Star Trek.
Absolutely. Now, the impact is also huge on modern day literature. And I want to come back to this idea of this battle between Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes, and this battle for relevancy. And what you find that once Arthur Conan Doyle passes away, the rights to Sherlock Holmes is bought by other authors and actually is adapted into 120 different novels. There's literally hundreds of versions of the film, and there's also video games and graphic novels. And you get this impression that while Arthur Conan Doyle has passed away, the soul of Sherlock Holmes has lived on and is still with us today.
As I mentioned somewhere in the beginning, our modern day heroes are James Bond and Indiana Jones. But now things have taken a turn for the reverse. Now we have a Sherlock Holmes who is a action hero. If you think back to Guy Ritchie's version of Sherlock Holmes, he's a boxer. He's a bit more comfortable in society. He knows how to move in and out of society. He's no longer the outside figure that we knew from the original work. He's become reinterpreted as this kind of much more typical action hero.
He's almost become a legend, Sherlock Holmes, and it's almost like the story's changed over time. But during the time when the originals were written, this character was so believable that people actually thought Sherlock Holmes existed. And Arthur Conan Doyle would receive hundreds of letters, not addressing him, addressing Sherlock Holmes, because people had this idea that Arthur Conan Doyle actually knew Sherlock Holmes and was recalling his recalling his story. And as you might imagine, this really angered Arthur Conan Doyle, so much so that he actually kills Sherlock Holmes in one of the novels, killed by Moriarty.
The archenemy.
The archenemy, yeah.
As we mentioned about Dracula, Sherlock as well is a superhero figure in a way before our time, like a 19th century superhero figure. And yeah, I think
his soul lives on. And I think that's probably a good place to end this. And thank you for listening, and we will see you next Friday. Thank
See
you.
you.
Goodbye.